Senator Moran, right?
Because I do need, Senator Darcy asked me to comment on the whole area of dog's body. If dog's body is too strong a word, the fact of the matter is that the definition of dog's body would be that you do anything and everything within the school. An SNA, and what I meant by that, an SNA is not a whole-time resource for the school to do anything and everything that anybody wants. Their job is to look after the children, and that's the point I want to make. In relation to,
it's a bit like a senator to me or something.
Well, just going to say to you, in terms of going lion hunting with me, I'm a lover of all animals, and I'm a lover of our fire, so there'd be no sense of going lion hunting with me. I'd probably let him attack you if not.
Just as well, I mean, to be fair, Desi said seen as a general dog's body. He didn't say treated as a general dog's body. So just to clarify that as well. Senator Moran.
Yeah, thanks very much. Again, I think it's some of the points that have been raised definitely are things that I would wholeheartedly concur and will be included in my report. It's kind of given me confidence as well, leading on that I am on the right direction and that the information that I'm getting is feeding in. Not to stray off it again as well, but I think, Teresa, when we're looking at, as I said there, getting the information, getting it out, it's not like a one-size-fits-all, like you can allocate teachers to a school and say we have pupil-teacher ratio or whatever. When we're in, when an SNA is allocated to a school, there are many, many different complex needs within that, and I think that that's where a personalised look at it, and that's where, and we haven't mentioned them today, but I think that's where the role of the CNO comes in, being vital in being in there. And I know that, again, and I'm not having to go with CNOs, but sometimes there can be very few and very hard to contact and to communicate with parents. And indeed, a lot of parents aren't even aware of the involvement in the CNO. So I think that's very important. The other thing is with the Department of Education, yes, I totally agree, and I think it's going back to the point that you made there about getting the information out, getting it out to exactly what parents can expect with the role. I definitely think the SNA needs to be in at all of those IEPs. Unlike some of my other colleagues, like I know Senator Darcy and Senator Daly, that came from the primary end, I actually came from the secondary end of it. And I do think even today we're having a different discussion than we had a couple of years ago when we were talking about the role of the SNA, where and we've moved away from that direction, where I think even at the beginning SNAs would freely, and I know I saw it myself, where SNA's role included photocopying, making tea, where thank God we've moved away from all of that, and that hasn't even come up today. So I think that's, that is a huge point. I do ask again on the what is the department's the views of providing CPD to SNAs. I think it needs to be there. I think we need to have your view on having a look at those entry requirements again for being to SNA, to give them, because I know even when I met with a lot of them and raised that point with them, they weren't even aware of what the level of qualifications were. They just automatically presumed that they were higher. I don't want to start having or putting a negative impact in on this, but just in view, one of the questions, and if I could just refer to it, one of the questions that I did ask on the report were about respect. Was one of the questions on the survey. Do you feel respected in your job? And while a 52.9% of almost 3,000 replies came back and answered yes, there were 8% who said no and 39% who said sometimes. So I do think it is something that we look in. There is excellent work going out there, and I know with meeting with them that the vast majority of them will say yes, I was there. But you do have, and I suppose it would be the same with my teaching colleagues that are here. If we put a survey out to teachers and ask them, do you feel responsible or do you that? I think the roles concerned, I know that some of the comments I got back, like that their duties included cleaning up after a child if they were sick, cleaning up after a child after their lunch or whatever. And they'd say, well, that's not my role. But I do think that in the big scheme of pictures, I mean, I know in my role as a teacher, I've done that. And, I can say, well, that wasn't my job or that wasn't. But when you're in the situation, everybody is flexible with their position. So I think that is something, that needs to come on. But, you know, just to say that we need to let our SNAs know that they are respected, that they can come into the staff room at the same time as everybody else, not be made have their, you know, breaks at a different time. You know, oh, there was just one other point that I was going to say. Yeah, we do need to make sure that, you know, that they do feel respected. But if I could just say in conclusion, just to thank everybody for coming in. I think it really has been very, very good. And I know the peer support, Anya, I see it. I see it as a different role in the primary and the secondary school. And I do think that we need to have a look to make sure that there is somebody over those children, because very often the children who volunteer to be buddies or, you know, offer peer support can overindulge in it, and you know, just for their own safety as well, that you know, we need to be careful with that.
Yeah, Deputy, yeah. And just to say, the post-primary Parents' Council were invited, but they weren't in a position to put forward a speaker. So, Deputy McConalogue.
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson. Just to the NCSE, just in relation to the total number of applications received for students requesting SNA support, you mentioned, I think, a figure of 24,000 applications last year.
It was for resource teacher and SNA support.
That was for resource and
for SNA support. Last year we had just over 8,600 over the year, and the previous year it was 8,800, and the previous year it was 7,500. They're rough.
800 the previous year.
8,800 the previous year and 7,500 the year before that. So it goes up and down.
And what is it this year?
This year, the number of applications, this is just for round one, because the totality I was giving you, 5,800, and that would be broadly in line with the same number, with the number last year.
5,800?
5,800, yeah. 5,826 to be precise.
Okay. So how come that's 5,826 is much lower than it was? Say 8. Yeah.
It's round one and round two.
So what would have been round one last year?
Round one was 5,813.
So it's roughly at around what
roughly
level?
The same, yeah.
Okay. I see. And tell me, in terms of the number that have been refused, you're saying 35%, 3,000, 35% of the 8,500 last year would have been refused. Is that is that in line, or is that going up from previous years?
It depends on why.
Yeah. It fluctuates. I think last year we thought it was a little bit higher than normal. So, yeah, we thought last year was a little bit higher than normal, but I haven't got the actual percentages with me. But I can come back to you.
And the second round, who would be included in the second round? Just new students that start for the first time?
Well, it's students, it's needs as they emerge during the course of the year. So, for example, in the current school year, we allocated 165 posts between September and now.
500. Just like, I mean, it seems like quite, if you start off in round one, say last year with 5,800, and it ends up at 8,600. If you're just talking about it being new infants and that coming in and people transferring from primary to secondary, like why 3,000? Why would they not all come in round one? Why would round one be not much larger?
Because the closing date for round one would be, say, sometime in March.
Yeah.
But assessments happen throughout the course of the year. Emerging needs happen throughout the course of the year. Children going into junior infants, typically we wait and see how they settle down. So that's a process that happens during the course of the year. So it is an iterative process.
So that 8,800, that would be new applications as such. Anybody that had an SNA, let's say a second or a first class student that had an SNA last year, that continues. They don't have to apply afresh, do they?
They don't have to apply afresh if they have one.
If they have, so really the first round and second round are for new students that are entering the education system, or else for a newly identified need. Yes. Those that had it the previous year, if they're continuing at the same level in school, would keep their SNA.
I think you can get applications. There wouldn't necessarily be new students. So, for example, there could be students going from primary into special school. There could be students going from primary into post-primary. There could be students going from primary into special classes. There could be existing students looking for more. You know, there's a multiplicity around them. So it's very hard, actually, and we don't tend to do an analysis of those. We just tend to sort of say that these are the number that we have. Okay.
And can I ask the department, in relation to, there was an additional 220 teachers announced in the budget, SNAs announced in the budget to start in September 2015. I take it from what you're saying that 220 won't be sufficient. Yeah, and on what basis would that 220 have been arrived at? Was it
projected figures? But of course, we can only project on the basis of previous experience. Yes. The reality emerges when the application process has gone through and when it's been checked and double checked.
And you mentioned that the department are doing diligence at the moment in relation to the
numbers.
Referral from the NCSE. What does diligence? What's involved in that?
Well, there are a number of discussions that take place. We have to check to see whether or not there has been proper explanations in relation to growth over the years. We need to satisfy ourselves that the SNAs, the NCSE, has managed the process properly. So it's generally a discussive process.
I see.
When do you expect to have the allocation?
Within days.
And just one final thing in relation to the NCSE. There was a report in the Irish Times yesterday indicating that the NCSE made its referral or request for the additional SNAs to the department last week, which would be later than usual. Is there a particular reason for that, or and also just a comment in general in relation to why there's a delay this year over and above what it would be in other years?
Is that the last question? Yeah. Okay, so maybe if Teresa, if you could, because we're going to ask everybody to wrap up, if you can do any outstanding questions, okay. And then I'll go to each.
Okay, just in relation to that last issue, I don't think the report in the Irish Times was accurate. Okay. In its entirety. We think that we actually provided the information either at the same time or maybe a few days even earlier than we did last year. I think just in relation to, I suppose I have to say one thing very quickly, just in relation to Senator Moore about the SNAs. I think it's really important for everybody to realise that there are 80 SNAs. There are 180,000 parents who have special education needs. There are 4,000 schools, all of whom are looking for supports. So obviously it's difficult sometimes to contact them, but they do answer if they get a call, and if a message is left, they do get back to those parents. They do get back to schools. And I think just again as an initiative this year, we and I think I announced that we were going to do this the last time I was here. We provided parental information leaflets throughout parental information evenings throughout the estate this year. 900 parents of newly diagnosed children with special education needs attended those. They were led by our SNAs. We worked with the HSE, and the response was overwhelmingly positive from parents. And again, it's just to try and get that
parents.
Sorry, solely for parents of children who had newly diagnosed. Yeah, solely of parents.
It's I think it needs.
But
to be
you have to start somewhere, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay, but Jen, again, I just felt I had to say that, and just in respect of the things.
Okay, Jim, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Chairperson. There were a number of questions asked at the department, which I don't think I took an opportunity to answer. I think I only answered one, and then we moved on. But I realised that you're under time pressure. Could I just start by saying that right at the outset, Senator Moran mentioned that in the context, I think, of the survey that you did, that there was a sense that SNA work wasn't being properly credited, and I'd like to take the opportunity at the part of the department to recognise the very good and important work that's being done by SNAs. I think often at forums like this and others where we talk about SNAs, we end up talking about perhaps the negative part about it, the bit that we see we need to fix. But most of it is very good. Most of the SNAs, in fact, probably all of them are certainly doing their best. Most of them are excellent. So we want to take the opportunity to recognise that. We are proposing to review the scheme. It should, of course, there should not be ongoing rolling review. We're proposing to commence a new one fairly shortly. We have only the circular in place for 1 year. We can't say that there's been a significant amount of feedback on how well that's bedding in. It will take time. Clearly, we didn't want the circular to have a massive impact so as to frighten parents or frighten schools or frighten SNAs. But we are trying to put a little bit of shape on it so that everybody has a better understanding of the role of SNAs. And I suppose you used a very interesting phrase that reality no longer matches policy, and the objective of our review will be to try and bring reality and policy a little bit closer together. It will never be perfect, but we'll continue to strive to make it grow. I am anxious, and particularly when I hear that IEP meetings are happening without SNAs being present. It is a feature of the circular that where an SNA is being provided, there should be a care plan in place. I cannot see how a care plan could possibly be agreed without the SNA being involved in the discussion. If further clarification in response to Deputy Daly, if further clarification on that is required, we'll certainly consider that. It may well be possible to do it by informing the system of the need to implement the circular fully, or if we need to go further than that, I'd be happy to consider that. Deputy O'Brien, I realise he's not here. He raised the issue about the care supports, and I think part of the issue, and it was raised also by Senator Crockwell, it was about moving from individually allocated SNAs to shared resource, and whether Senator Crockwell asked whether that was a funding decision, but I think oftentimes the implication is more is it causing a problem within the system? Certainly it's not a funding decision. The view of the department is that the historic association between child and SNA was an inappropriate one. It was an obvious consequence of the fact that when integration started or inclusion started in the early days, and there were only a small number of children with identified special needs in schools, it was always going to be the case that SNAs were going to be identified with the children. But that has always been an undesirable feature of the scheme, and we have moved strongly to move away from that, so that schools would have better control of the resource, and the parents wouldn't be misguided into believing that their child needed that person to be at their child's side the whole time, because we just think that's generally detrimental, and it becomes more and more so as children develop and approach the time when they're transferring into post-primary school, where they're reaching a degree of independence. And again, it reaches a question that we were asked earlier, where a child is reaching independence, the last thing they want, and they said this to the NCSE when the NCSE was doing their research on this, the last thing they want is an adult, sometimes an unfamiliar adult, stapled to their side, essentially. So we need to be very cautious and careful about how it is that we determine a care need and provide for that care need for a child who is developing into being a young man or a young woman in school. So we're very conscious of that. I'll try and wrap up, Chair, if I can. The circular, I addressed the issue about feedback. There is an issue about care need assistance to preschools. A number of people raised it. I'm currently sitting on a working group being chaired by our colleagues in the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, considering this particular matter, and the working group is hoping to report sometime in the latter part of the year. We're being assisted by colleagues in the NCC on this, so hopefully we'll see some further clarification on that particular area in due course. We all recognise, of course, that early intervention is very important, and what that intervention should be, it needs to be clearly elaborated and clarified. So there's a fair bit of work currently ongoing on that. I'm coming very close to the end of it. So, sorry, the matter was raised again about CPD. Again, I fully accept the need for training. Again, there is a complexity about how that's delivered and how it should be delivered. Ongoing CPD is meaningless unless we have a structured programme for it. We do make provision for boards of management to provide individualised, tailored CPD or tailored training. There is provision, of course, from the Middletown Autism Centre, who we provide funding toward, to provide some training for schools, for parents, for families, to cater for children with significant autism difficulties. But it is something that I think we'll be able to do within the context of a forthcoming review. And again, we understand the importance of it. I am concerned when I hear about surveys when SNAs are saying that 8% of them are saying they feel disrespected. I think there's probably an issue we all need to consider about the relationship of SNAs within the school. That can be improved. It can be improved through the issue of proper clarity and all of that. We're very anxious in the department to ensure that when we issue clarifications that we're not being overly prescriptive and that we're not being underly prescriptive. We need to provide guidance, but we don't need to regulate the hell out of the scheme, and that because that would be in nobody's interest. So we're very anxious to ensure that the scheme develops in a way that SNAs feel valued and feel respected, and that their role is clear, and that their engagement within their school is clear. And that means educating not just SNAs, it means educating educating teachers and principals and boards of management. I think that's just about as much as I can say at this stage.
Right,
Can I just say that I just welcome the funding, or that Minister O'Sullivan is seeking additional funding for SNAs. I think that will be another huge impact, and something that I wanted to say earlier.
Did you want to say more?
Just a few small things. I think just in terms of the IEP and the fact that SNAs sometimes aren't included in the IEP, just for clarification, parents aren't sometimes included in the IEP meetings either. So I think if there's clarification around who should be included in IEP, parents should be there as well. I think just in terms of Deputy Daly's question around post-primary, now obviously we represent parents at primary level, but I think it even impacts on children at the higher end of primary school as well. I think as children get older, their voice in how SNA allocation is divided to their time within the school and how their IEP should look like, and the SNA involvement needs to become more and more important. So I think that's really how you manage that stigmatisation for older children with having the SNA involvement. I think that the child's and young person's voice is really, really important in deciding how that works. And I suppose just the last thing to say is within the context of the system that we have now, these kind of conversations are really important to have around the role of the SNA. But I think also it's really important to for us to suggest that maybe the conversation needs to be raised to a higher level of how we currently provide supports to children in schools more generally that have special education needs. And, you know, it goes back to the area of why do people still not understand the role of SNAs. I think as long as the system is constructed around the resource teacher, the teacher and the SNA, we're going to be there's a huge amount of resource goes into special education in the education sector, and yet still children can't access the resources they need within the education sector to access their education. And we still feel that discussion needs to be opened up broader, and the fact that the speech and language therapists, the behavioural therapists, the occupational therapists needs to be available to the school to support the child's access to education rather than them being separate as they are now. So just that's the final comment. Thanks.
Okay, Desi or John?
There were a good few questions asked for us, and I think they were answered indirectly in some of them, but maybe on the Jobs Bridge one that was asked of me earlier on. What do we view Jobs Bridge? And just to say, on the Jobs Bridge, we this year had to go to the Department of Social Protection to complain that it was being abused in the schools on the basis that people were being brought in under the guise of classroom assistants when there wasn't any role of a classroom assistant recognised within the Department of Education. So therefore, the schools were looking for classroom assistants for a role that didn't exist, but using them for everything and anything. Unfortunately, we did get an opportunity to, since that has been a review of Jobs Bridge in the education sector, and it's since ceased that role of classroom assistants application. Sorry?
You're not against Jobs Bridge per se?
No, for a particular point in time, we're not against it. I think it needs to be looked at again for a different point in time. It's a new world. It was good at the time. Just on the couple of points I want to make in relation to, our view, there's a couple of things we need are the respect, and even the respect of them SNAs, not to have known when their school year finished yesterday, last Friday, whether or not they have a job in September is wrong. There's no other profession within the education system that would allow that to happen, that wouldn't be walking the streets. But unfortunately, the SNAs, this is the last 2 years, they've been left till the last minute. It's unfair and it's not respectable of SNAs. Training, everybody's agreed training should be provided, but what will have to be provided is the budget to match that training. Because when we saw training for SNAs, the first thing that was in the Department of Ed said, we don't give training. We've had to use the resource of impact to ensure training is being provided for SNAs. And finally, I have to say, the real issue is security of tenure for SNAs. If we were to develop the role, we have to keep the best people in place. There's not a view that these people, the vast majority of SNAs are female. They're not doing it for pin money. They're doing it to make a living as well as to provide a service. They need security of tenure. In order, when they get that, then we can develop the role.
You don't like clarifying, are all SNAs let go for the summer, or is it? Can you just clarify?
It depends on the schools. So it depends on schools. Someone would be available for June, and someone would be available for.
Are they all employed directly by the school? Is that
they're directed. Yeah. They're directed by directed by the school. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else? Was that?
Just that, you know, when we contacted the ACSS, because they have a budget for providing training for teachers who work with children with special educational needs, and at those training sessions every year in the education centres there are empty seats, lots of empty seats, and we asked if we could put bums on seats, if we could, you know, include the SNAs in the training, because we wanted the same training for the SNAs that the teachers were getting, especially if they were going to be looking after children with challenging behaviour, in particular children with autism, that they would have the same, they'd be all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we were just told it wasn't allowed. Now, some education centres did allow it, but they couldn't get the accreditation, they couldn't claim that they were there, but they were there, they were ghosts sitting on
from principals who contacted me with the same thing.
Another thing was just, another point was just that Impact facilitated information meetings for 2 years. We went around the country talking to special needs assistants about the role and about the appropriate duties that SNA should be carrying out. And one of the things that we always emphasised was how important it was that they weren't velcroed to the child, that they promoted independence, and that the care that they gave should be the care that they would give if it was their own child, or they should be looking for a different job. And we were, emphasising also that if they were working as a whole school resource and, taking on duties that should be assigned to the secretary or caretaker or cleaner, that they were diluting the service that they should be providing to a child with disabilities who had hard-won support from the NCSE. And I would also like to just finally plead with the NCSE and the department that when they are making policies in relation to allocating support, that it is vitally important in infant stages and in the formative years, in particular in first year in secondary school, that there's support. It doesn't have to be visible support, it can be just background support, because if children aren't succeeding socially in infants, if the teacher is firefighting all the time because a child is there with challenging behaviour and you're waiting to see if they're going to be settling down, and there isn't someone to assist with just settling them down, and they can be settling the whole class down, that child isn't going to make friends and they're going to have a very difficult time all the way up along, and I've seen that happen. And also in second level, in first year, the SNA's role is really just to organise the child and from a distance, but to make sure that child is also succeeding socially, because they're the children that drop out of school, and mental health is a huge issue, and they have a lot of change taking place when they're just coming in. So just even if it was just first year only, that there would be consideration of that.
Right, John. So we're going to wrap up now because we have to vacate the room. So I'd like to thank everybody, and I think we've had a very good and informative discussion that will help inform our report, and we'll be in touch then when we have the report. Okay. So this meeting is now adjourned, and the next meeting of the Joint Committee has been scheduled for Wednesday, 8th of July at 1 o'clock.